Good evening. Welcome everybody to our Heart Health Lecture Series. I'm Dr. Dennis Goodman. I'm a clinical professor of medicine and director of integrative medicine at the Leon H. Charney Division of Cardiology here at NYU and part of the Center for Prevention of Cardiovascular Disease. We've been doing this series now, our lecture prevention series, since 2015. And I am so grateful to Julia and to Anya and Michelle for helping out. Thank you, Anya, specifically for spending so much time making this work. And we really, all of us look forward to this almost monthly lecture series where I get tremendous feedback. And I want to thank all our participants. We have we have a loyal group now of sometimes up to 100 people that are listening. So what I want to start off is just a little bit of logistics. This is how you ask a question. I think we've all become familiar with Zoom now, but you want to go to the Q&A box and you just write in your question, try to make it short, and I will try to get to all the questions at the end. And that's how we're going to answer your questions. So Q&A box at the bottom and just type in a question and I'll try to get to them, all of them at the end. Next. So the upcoming webinar is going to be a great topic. That's our next one. That's going to be on April 28th. The topic is preventing a heart attack and stroke. Your smartphone can help. And I think we all know we're living in a world now with smartphones and all this technology. And this is going to be specifically geared to how can this technology help you in terms of prevention and treatment of heart attacks and stroke. Next. So we want you to keep in touch with us, and this is how you find out what's going on, and this is how you register, and you can ask questions and you can leave me comments, whatever you want. And here are the ways that you can get hold of us. You can go to the website, which is there. There's our email, and we have a Twitter account as well. And myself or Anya will always get back to you if you send us an email. Next. So these are some of the past topics. And you can see now many of the topics we're bringing back again. We've had nutrition in the past. It's time for an update on diabetes. We've done inflammation in your heart health, a lot of stuff on stress management. So I'm very focused on all the important things that you can do to prevent heart attacks and strokes and be healthy. So my big focus is always nutrition, exercise and flexibility, stress management, and sleep. And you'll see many of my topics are involved in these four, what I call the four legs of a stool. And tonight we're actually going to be focusing very shortly on one of them, the big one, nutrition. Next slide. So tonight it's my honor, and it's really exciting to have Melissa Alazraki to come and talk to us. She is our nutritionist. She's a superstar here in our program. You cannot do a good job, and I'm talking for all of us. We cannot do a good job of helping patients if they're not eating properly. Nutrition is absolutely essential. We all know what Hippocrates said. Medicine is that, food is thy medicine. It's very, very important that we eat well. And so we always revisit this topic. People are sick and tired, I think, of hearing, don't eat this, don't eat that. But there's so much new in nutritional science now. And really a big part of this is to motivate people, to give them the knowledge to eat healthy. It turns out it's National Nutrition Month. We got in just in time on the 31st of March, and we couldn't have a better speaker. Melissa's a registered dietitian and certified diabetes care and education specialist. She received her degree in clinical nutrition, her MS, and completed her dietetic internship at NYU. She's currently in our program at the NYU Langone Center for Prevention of Cardiovascular Disease and the NYU Diabetes and Endocrine Associates program. She empowers everybody to make lifestyle changes for the management of prevention of chronic disease. As you'll find out very shortly, she's passionate about achieving good health through good, healthy food. Melissa, welcome. Thank you for agreeing to talk to our auspicious group and for being part of our prevention program. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Goodman, for that very kind introduction. I'm really excited to be here with all of you tonight on the precipice of the spring harvest season to talk about how we can incorporate seasonal food year-round to work towards heart health and mix up our meal routine a little bit too. Next. First, we'll talk about some of the eating patterns that I frequently recommend for heart health and what some of these eating patterns have in common. Then we'll talk about the benefits of eating seasonally, and then put it all together to talk about how we can incorporate seasonal food into a heart healthy diet year round. Next. So in our field, the conversation is really moving away from individual nutrients and towards overall dietary patterns. Next. Here is a very technical looking definition of dietary patterns for you. Ultimately, a dietary pattern is just the big picture. It encompasses everything you eat and drink while accounting for the frequency with which you choose each type of food and beverage. Next. So every 5 years, the government updates the dietary guidelines for Americans. And before each update comes out, a committee of very smart people sits down and reviews all of the recent literature on health and diet. And in their recent report, they found that there was actually stronger evidence linking dietary patterns with health outcomes than there was with any specific nutrient or food component. In other words, you're likely getting better benefit from focusing on an overall balanced, healthy diet than you are from getting stuck focusing on the inclusion or exclusion of just one nutrient. And this is probably because we don't go to the store and buy potassium or saturated fat. We eat foods with multiple nutrients in various combinations. So dietary patterns are probably likely a better representation of how we eat. I think they're also a little easier to understand because they tell us exactly what foods we should be choosing. They can also account for potential interactions and cumulative effects of the nutrients within a food or among a group of foods. In other words, the fish may be good for your heart health, but the fish with the whole grains and the vegetables with it is probably even better. Next. First, we're going to talk about the DASH eating plan. This stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. This is a plan that really emphasizes fruits, vegetables, whole grains, fat-free and low-fat dairy, fish, poultry, beans, nuts, and vegetable oils. It limits fatty meats, full-fat dairy, coconut and palm oil, sugar-sweetened beverages, snacks, and sweets. The defining features of this plan, it does include a sodium restriction. A maximum of 2,300 milligrams is recommended. It also emphasizes achieving a specific mineral intake, in particular emphasizing potassium, magnesium, and calcium. It encourages the use of fat-free and low-fat dairy, which I think is controversial for some. And it's also a generally low-fat plan. It sort of limits overall fat intake, including unsaturated fats. Next. Give you an idea of what this might look like in a typical day. If you're someone aiming for 1,800 to 2,000 calories, I think it's more fruits and vegetables than what we usually get in the standard American diet. There is still quite a bit of grains represented here, but you're encouraged to choose whole grains, and I think that does make a big difference. And I think it's a little bit less animal protein than we tend to eat in the standard American diet. If you look here, it says 6 ounces of meat, poultry, fish, or eggs. That means if you eat a serving of chicken, roughly the size of a deck of cards for lunch, and then a serving of fish, roughly the size of a deck of cards for dinner, that's it. You've met your whole allotment for the day. Next. The DASH eating plan was actually designed specifically for clinical trials in the 90s. It was designed to lower blood pressure. And after they did the research, they found it worked. And then since then, we have studied this eating plan in a variety of other contexts, and it really holds up. We continue to see evidence for its effectiveness, not only for lowering blood pressure, but also for weight loss, for decreasing LDL cholesterol, and that's the bad cholesterol that you want less of because it promotes the plaque formation in your arteries. It's been associated with decreased risk of coronary artery disease, decreased risk of developing type 2 diabetes, decreased risk of death from all causes, as well as death from specifically cardiovascular disease. Next. How does it work? We think that the mineral composition of this plan has a big role because, as we said, it goes past just limiting sodium, which is usually the headline recommendation you'll get if you have high blood pressure. Potassium, magnesium, and calcium all play important roles in muscle and nerve function in our bodies. So by encouraging plenty of potassium from fruits and vegetables like spinach and tomatoes and bananas and oranges, magnesium from seeds, nuts, and legumes, and calcium from the low-fat or fat-free dairy, the DASH eating plan can actually help your blood vessels relax appropriately. And so we think this may be one of the reasons it's really great for bringing down blood pressure. Next. Next, we're going to talk about the Mediterranean diet. I think this one gets a lot more press. It also emphasizes fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. Protein is encouraged primarily from seafood, legumes, nuts, and seeds, with smaller amounts of poultry, eggs, and dairy. And I think this is a big difference from the standard American diet. Fat comes primarily from unsaturated plant sources, especially olive oil and nuts. It limits sugar and red meat. And for me, the defining feature of the Mediterranean diet is that it really encourages liberal use of unsaturated fats. If you look at our Mediterranean food pyramid here from an organization called Old Ways that has a lot of resources on their website on the Mediterranean diet and other foodways, we see that avocados, nuts, and olive oil are really at the base of the pyramid alongside fruits and vegetables. Next. This diet kind of came on the scene when we started noticing from observational studies, such as the 7-country study back in the 1960s, that certain populations in the Mediterranean region had lower rates of death from coronary heart disease. And since then, there have been observational studies on this diet in every corner of the globe. We've even had a few large randomized controlled trials looking at this diet, and that's really sort of our gold standard for scientific evidence. And across the board, we continue to see evidence for benefits of the Mediterranean diet for a variety of cardiometabolic risk factors. Next. We have evidence that shows the Mediterranean diet is associated with lower weight and BMI, lower total and LDL cholesterol, lower triglycerides, higher LDL cholesterol, that's the good one that you want more of, lower blood sugar, insulin levels, and hemoglobin A1C, that's your average blood sugar over the last 2 to 3 months, lower blood pressure, and it's associated with decreased risk of incident cardiovascular disease, stroke, and coronary heart disease. Next. How does this one work? We have a few hypotheses. We think it might be anti-inflammatory because it's got lots of plant foods. Plants have lots of protective vitamins, minerals, and phytochemicals. It could also be something in the fat profile. Evidence has shown us that saturated fats as well as trans fats are the fats that really jack up the LDL cholesterol, the bad cholesterol. We also see that when we remove saturated fat from the diet, we get the most optimal heart health outcomes when we then replace it with unsaturated fat. This diet does exactly that. It's also high in fiber, and we know fiber is great for decreasing cholesterol, great for keeping blood sugar steady, and it's also really great for your gut. And we've been learning more and more about how important gut health is for all parts of our body. Next. The last plan we're going to talk about are plant-based diets. And this is really a constellation of eating patterns. You can be vegan, which excludes animal products of all kinds, lacto-ovo-vegetarian, which does include eggs and dairy. And there's also the concept of semi-vegetarian or flexitarian, and I think this idea has been gaining ground lately. This is a diet that's primarily vegetarian, but you occasionally include some fish, poultry, or meat. It's not all or nothing. If you're a fan of Mark Bittman, this is sort of the philosophy behind his latest book, VB6, Vegan Before 6. He sort of created this plan for himself where he was going to follow a vegan diet and exclude all refined foods before 6 p.m. After 6 p.m., he was going to eat whatever he wanted in moderation. Of course, because he's Mark Bittman, he knows how to make all of these foods delicious, which is something that I hope we can also learn about together today. So it's the idea that you can get some of these heart health benefits without completely giving up your chicken or your occasional hamburger. Next. A lot of the evidence we have on the potential benefits of plant-based eating comes from the Adventist health studies. These are studies in cohorts of Seventh-day Adventists, many of whom limit animal products for religious reasons. So they make a great sample set for us. And from these studies, we have seen that vegetarians, which includes semi-vegetarians, had lower risk of death from cardiovascular disease. We also saw that vegans and lacto-ovo vegetarians were less likely to have high blood pressure, less likely to have high cholesterol, and less likely to carry fat around their midsections. And we think that that is the type of fat that tends to contribute most to cardiovascular disease risk. Next. Now, the plant-based diet has gotten a lot of buzz lately, and there are many reasons that people are moving towards plant-based eating aside from health. There's also a lot of talk about, moral and environmental reasons to pursue a plant-based diet. You may have seen that even Burger King and Dunkin' Donuts are advertising plant-based meal options at their fast food locations. So I think here it really behooves us to pause for a moment and think about, how do we want to implement a plant-based diet if our goal is heart health? Because if we look at these pictures of two different aisles in your grocery store, we see plant foods in both, but I think we can all agree that these different types of plant foods are not going to have the same impact on your cardiometabolic health. Next. So I wanted to take a minute to look at this study from a few years ago, because I think it really helps us answer that question of, if I'm going to follow a plant-based diet for heart health, what plant foods should I be choosing? So researchers created 3 indices that they used to score participants' diets. The first is an overall plant-based diet index. You scored higher on this index for eating any and all plant foods. The next is a healthful plant-based diet index. Here you scored higher if you ate lots of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, legumes, and vegetable oils. And then there was the unhealthful plant-based diet index. You scored higher on this index if you ate a lot of refined grains, potatoes, sweets, sugar-sweetened beverages, and fruit juice. Next. So if we look on the graph on the left, what it shows us, if you look at the solid red line, that shows us that subjects that had the higher scores on the healthful plant-based diet index, the one who ate lots of fruits and vegetables and whole grains, etc., they had lower risk of coronary heart disease. If we look at the dotted blue line, that's showing us that people that scored high on the overall plant-based diet index got some benefit, but not quite as much. And then that dashed gray line trending up shows us that people who scored higher on the unhealthful plant-based diet index actually increased their risk of coronary heart disease. So I think there are 2 important lessons we can take away from this. One is that if you are going to choose to follow a plant-based diet for reasons of heart health, you want to make sure that you're choosing minimally processed carbohydrates and a good variety of them: fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts. The other lesson that I take away from this is that it doesn't have to be all or nothing. I think it really supports the idea of the flexitarian or semi-vegetarian diet. Because as you can see, if you can incrementally increase the number of plant-based meals you're eating per week, you can get a corresponding incremental increase in your protection from heart disease. And when we kind of reflect on the other eating patterns we've talked about, that's sort of what they're doing, right? They're sort of saying, let's get more protein from legumes and nuts and seeds throughout the week. Next. So I wanted to take a moment to look at these common themes between all 3 of these eating patterns to send you away with what I would consider sort of your heart healthy eating headlines. Next. The first headline is eat whole or minimally processed foods. The less it was broken down outside your body, the less a food company has fiddled with it or added something to it, in my opinion, the better. Next. Eat more plants. And this includes the plants with carbohydrates and naturally occurring sugar. I know we got mad at carbohydrate, but the type of carbohydrate you choose really matters, and the balance of your plate matters. So it is perfectly reasonable for someone who is thinking of their heart health to consume fruits and starchy vegetables and whole grains and legumes. Next. Get most of your fat from plants. This would be a variety of vegetable oils, nuts, and avocados. Next. Low-fat dairy, fish, eggs, and lean poultry can be incorporated. It may be best to use some of these in moderation, and it really depends on your personal health goals and your preferences. Then finally, use fatty meats and red meats, animal fats, added sugar, refined carbohydrate, and packaged snacks more sparingly. They don't have to go away entirely, but they shouldn't be predominantly what we eat. These little piggies agree that less meat is a great idea. Now that we have a general sense of the overall eating pattern that we want to aim for to promote heart health, let's talk a little bit about the benefits of seasonal eating. And I think that to talk about seasonal eating is really to talk about eating locally, right? Because the idea is that we're trying to draw from the produce that is being harvested in our area at that time. Next. There are many benefits to eating seasonally, both for us personally and for our communities and the environment. First of all, seasonal eating often costs less. You may have noticed that if you go to the store in January and try to buy a carton of strawberries, you might pay a good $7 or $8 for those strawberries, at least here in the city, right? But if you go to buy that carton of strawberries in June, it might be on sale for $3 because that's when that fruit is abundant in our area. It's also a really great way to vary your diet, and variety is good nutrition because each vegetable, fruit, and legume gives you a slightly different profile of vitamins and minerals. You're likely also going to get better quality and taste from seasonal and local produce. And this is because fruits and vegetables that are harvested on season and closer to you, closer to your home, are generally allowed to ripen more before they're harvested, as opposed to something that's got to make it across the country or across the world. Those fruits and vegetables are usually going to be picked before peak ripeness. Are you going to get better nutrition if you eat seasonally? You just might. There was a study of iceberg lettuce that saw decreases in quality and decreases of the content of some nutrients by the time it sat on the shelf in the stores for 3 or 4 days. Now, there are lots of factors that can affect the nutrient content of your fruits and vegetables, but in general, the longer they spend in transit and on shelves, the more likely they are to lose nutrients. Next. Pulling out a little bit to the benefits of seasonal eating outside our own homes, it's really good for the local economy and local agriculture. We'll speak about that some more in a moment. And it's also good for the environment. You see here a table that talks about food miles. Food miles refers to the distance that your food has to travel from the farm to your table. So you can sort of think of it as the carbon footprint of your food because travel requires fuel. So you see here how we can really drastically change our impact on the environment by choosing foods that were grown closer to our homes. And that in turn means eating seasonally because then we have to choose what's growing near us at that time. Next. Where can we find seasonal produce? It really is all around us. Your local supermarket is a great place to start. You don't have to go to something big and fancy like a Whole Foods, just your neighborhood Key Foods or C-Town or whatever you've got. When you walk in the summer, you probably notice that suddenly there are big displays of corn and tomatoes and peaches, again, because it's abundant in our region at that time. Farmers markets are also a really great place to find seasonal produce from local growers. And if you're not sure where your local farmers market is, if you're in the city, you can try grownyc.org. If you're elsewhere in New York State, you can try agriculture.ny.gov to look for a farmer's market near you. You could also consider joining a CSA. That stands for Community Supported Agriculture. In a CSA, you buy a share of a local farmer's crop in advance. So it does require that you're financially able to pay for all of your produce for the whole season upfront. But then once the harvest season starts, the farmers week to week truck in a whole bunch of produce to a pickup spot in your neighborhood. You're sort of locked in for whatever is harvested week to week. In non-COVID times, there will usually be some swapping. I like it. I consider it sort of a personal challenge. Like if you watch the Food Network, like Chopped, that's our weekly Chopped basket. Usually it involves working some sort of shift. Again, I don't think that's all bad. Pictured here is my daughter just before her second birthday, totally of her own free will, dutifully working her CSA shift, unloading the kale, and then pushing the empty boxes back to the truck to be returned to the farm. I think CSA is, if it's feasible for you, a really great way to get involved in your community and to get a variety of beautiful seasonal produce in your home. And it can kind of push you to try new things because whatever comes in the share that week it's what you got. And so you're figuring out how to cook kohlrabi this week. And then you find new things that you didn't know you loved. If you're interested in looking for a CSA, you can try the website at the bottom here, localharvest.org/CSA. Next. And we also have a video that we are going to be sending to you from Ben Shute of Hardy Roots Farms up in upstate New York. He is a farmer that participates in CSAs all around the region. And he has some information to share with you a bit more about the benefits of CSA from the perspective of the farmer. Now, I personally learned a lot from this video, so I hope you'll enjoy it too. He talked a bit about how financially advantageous it was to be able to get that money up front from the community to sort of purchase seeds, pay his workers, so that he didn't have to take out a loan from the bank, and that savings actually gets passed on to us, because if he'd had to pay all that interest, he would have had to charge more for his produce. So we actually got an overall cost savings by giving him the money up front. He also talked a little bit about how CSA allows for crop diversity, because rather than just producing one thing as instead of just being the corn supplier or the soybean supplier, he's really supplying everything that we eat over the course of the week, and how that crop diversity is actually really great for the soil quality on his farm. So there are just so many advantages to this setup, and we hope you'll enjoy the video from Ben after this presentation. Next. All right, let's talk about food. Let's get into it, right? Now that we kind of know what patterns we're looking towards, let's talk about what are some specific heart-healthy foods that we can choose across the seasons, and let's talk about how we're gonna make them delicious. Next. Starting off in the winter, there are some crops that are harvested into December, but in general in winter, what we're looking at are foods that can be stored for a little while and remain reasonably palatable and nutritious. So in the winter, you will still see foods like beans, cabbage, collard greens, parsnips, turnips, carrots, celery root, apples, pears, beets, winter squash, and potatoes. Next. As we go through the seasons, I'll just highlight a few vegetables that you might want to consider. Winter is a time of roots and tubers. They are hardy little guys, they last, and they're a great way to add colorful, high fiber carbohydrate to your plate. You can always cube and roast them with olive oil. You will soon learn, I have never met a vegetable I couldn't roast, and potentially some fruits as well. It always works. You could also puree them for a creamy texture or add them to soups and stews. Next. I wanted to talk about two root vegetables that I think don't make it to our tables quite as frequently, but are really delicious. This is celery, also called celery root. When you see it whole in the store, it's kind of this knobby, gnarly root. It's sometimes a little hairy. Don't be scared. You cut all that away with a big chef's knife. The inside is white. The texture is sort of like a potato or a turnip, and the flavor is sort of reminiscent of celery or parsley. And these root vegetables are great sources of potassium and fiber. You can eat them raw or cooked. If you cut them into thin matchsticks and mix them with a Dijon mustard dressing, that's a very French preparation. But then, of course, there's always the good old cube and roast. I'm telling you, in a pinch, it always works. Next. The next root veggie is parsnip. Parsnips look like white carrots. You'll find them in the same area of your grocery store usually. They're a little bit sweeter, I think usually a little bit creamier. And I think that there's this common misconception that white foods can't be good for you. And it's just not true if we're talking about white vegetables, because there is actually a pigment that's creating that creamy white color in the parsnips called an anthocyanin. And anthocyanins are antioxidants, just like their red and purple and blue colors that give the pigment to the more brightly colored foods. So these are absolutely healthy choices. They're great sources of fiber, potassium, and vitamin C. They can also be eaten raw or cooked. If you're going to eat them raw, just shave them real thin with a vegetable peeler to mix into your salads. Next. Now I wanted to talk about the humble cabbage. Cabbage is the leafy vegetable that's harvested latest into the season, and it is also really sturdy. It'll just hang out in your vegetable crisper for a while. So if your family is anything like mine, by March, you have eaten a lot of cabbage. So I think it's good to think about what are some of the different ways we can use cabbage so we don't get too bored. You could braise cabbage for a softer texture and to infuse some other flavors. You can also cut it into wedges and roast it in the oven for something with a little more crunch. And it also gets that nice caramelization, that browning that you get out of roasting, which changes the flavor just a little. Cabbage is also really tasty if you shred it thin and then you can mix it into a stir fry. Say, for example, if you have some leftover quinoa or brown rice, because we know whole grains are part of a heart-healthy diet. If you saute that up with the shredded cabbage, the cabbage just melts right in and really bulks up your whole dish. And you can do that with maybe some sesame oil, some low sodium soy sauce, some vinegar, ginger, garlic, onion. You make yourself sort of a fried rice. This is a great vehicle for leftovers. Next. For a recipe highlight for winter, I wanted to share this winter vegetable fattoush. Now, a fattoush is a Middle Eastern salad that was developed as a way to use up leftover stale pita. It's thought to have originated in Lebanon. Usually you see it with cucumbers and tomatoes, but here I thought this was a really creative way to bring different flavors to the winter veg that you've been eating for months on end. You just take 6 to 8 cups of your leftover roasted winter veggies, mix it with thinly sliced red onion, a little bit of toasted whole wheat pita, and then you make a dressing from Greek yogurt, lemon juice, minced garlic, olive oil, and vinegar. And then to really brighten up the flavors even more, you can garnish with mint and parsley and some sumac if you got it. You can usually get that at specialty grocery stores. It's an ingredient commonly seen in Middle Eastern cooking. Next. Moving on to spring, when everything gets green and fresh again. We're almost there, guys. In the spring, we see asparagus, ramps, and garlic scapes, which are these sort of hyper-seasonal little alliums that chefs in our region really go crazy for. Fava beans, pea shoots, radishes, spinach, lettuce, beaten turnip greens, new potatoes, rhubarb, and strawberries. Next. Our first spotlight for spring is asparagus. The season is really short, so you got to get it while you can if you want it local. It's harvested in May and just part of June. They're a great source of fiber and vitamin A, and they are really versatile. You can also shave this if you want to eat it raw in a salad, mixed with lemon juice and olive oil, topped with a little bit of shredded Parmesan cheese or some slivered almonds. You can roast it, grill it, saute it. It pairs really well with balsamic vinegar as a flavoring. And in addition to just using it on its own as a side dish, you could mix it into the carbohydrate portion of your plate to add even more veggies. It goes great in whole wheat pasta or a barley risotto. Also pairs really well with eggs. Next. Our next spotlight is strawberries. This is the first fruit we see in the season. It comes in early, sort of at the end of spring. Strawberries are high in fiber, vitamin C, and antioxidants. And we all know how to snack a strawberry or throw it in some yogurt, throw it on top of our oatmeal. Those are all good options. But to try something a little bit new, strawberries actually pair really well with balsamic vinegar. Now, I told you I'll roast everything, and I meant it. So you could try these balsamic roasted strawberries where you just toss them with a little balsamic vinegar, olive oil, a little bit of maple syrup. It makes a really yummy yogurt topping, or you could try it on some whole grain toast with a bit of almond butter or low-fat ricotta cheese. Next. For our spring recipe highlight, we have a pea shoot and radish salad. Pea shoots can be cooked. You'll sometimes see recipes for sauteing them in Asian cuisines with some sesame oil, but they're really delicious raw as kind of an alternative to lettuce. And again, it's something the season is short, so you want to get it while you can. It does have like a slightly pea-like flavor. Here, you can just mix 2 to 3 handfuls of your pea shoots with some sliced radishes, also in season in spring, a palmful of almonds or hazelnuts chopped up for some good heart-healthy fats and plant-based protein, a bit of chopped mint, and then all it needs is some olive oil and lemon juice, really, but you can make yourself a fancier dressing with Dijon if you'd like. Next. Now we come to summer. The harvest season is in full swing. This is when the farmers markets get just so bright and beautiful and colorful. I genuinely get excited just thinking about it because I am a vegetable nerd, sorry. But in the summer, we see lettuce, peas, peppers, zucchini and summer squash, Swiss chard, tomatoes, green beans, corn, cucumbers, eggplant, all the berries, cherries in the early summer, melons a little bit later, peaches, nectarines, plums, and apricots. Yum. Next. For the first spotlight of summer, I wanted to talk about corn. Whenever I suggest to someone that they eat corn, they are always shocked and they say, well, isn't it full of sugar? Isn't it all carb? Yes, corn is a carbohydrate, but we know that carbohydrate from starchy vegetables and whole grains acts differently in our body than refined and processed carbohydrates. So as long as you bear in mind that this is your carbohydrate and not your non-starchy vegetable, corn can absolutely be part of a heart-healthy diet. You'll usually hear me say to patients, I don't want you to put corn next to potatoes, but if you put corn next to sauteed string beans and a piece of chicken, now you have a beautiful balanced meal. Corn contains fiber and magnesium, which we know are great nutrients for heart health, and it can be eaten raw or cooked. It's really dead simple to just grill or roast it with the husk on there for a summer side dish, and then the husk comes right off super easy after it's cooked. Next. Our next summer spotlight is chard. Chard is a leafy green with a sturdy stalk. It's sometimes colorful. When it's at that point, it's usually called rainbow chard. You do lose most of the color when you cook it, but it's pretty for a little while. It contains fiber, magnesium, and potassium, so a real powerhouse if you're aiming for the DASH eating plan. You can just roughly chop and saute chard as is with some garlic if you don't mind a little bit of a crunchy texture. But if you like it softer, you just separate your stems from your leaves. You saute the stems a little while first to give them some time, then add in your leaves, braise with white wine or low sodium broth. Really delicious with some white beans thrown in there for a plant-based meal. Next. Let's talk about all the fruit. There is just such an abundance of fruit available in our region in the summer. And again, we all know how to grab it for a snack or eat it with some yogurt. So I thought it would be nice to talk about some other ways we can use the fruit. You could cut stone fruit in half. Your stone fruits are your peaches and your nectarines, and grill or broil them to concentrate the flavors. You could try mixing up some cubed melon with sliced cucumbers and a simple oil and vinegar dressing to make just kind of a sweet and tangy salad, good with a little sprinkle of feta cheese. You can also make a quick seasonal kale salad. I have been known to eat this for breakfast as well as lunch. You take some curly kale or the lacinato kale, which is the flatter variety, sometimes called dino kale. Slice it really thin. Mix it with blueberries or a diced up peach or nectarine. Top that with some chopped up almonds, olive oil, lemon juice, and a light sprinkle of salt. I love this salad because it is infinitely adaptable for any season that you're in. So if, for example, you decide you love this quick kale salad and you want to eat it into the fall, you just swap out your blueberries and peaches for apples and pears. You could roast the pears. They're delicious that way too. And when I switch the fruits out, I like to switch out the nuts as well. I like to swap out almonds for pecans or walnuts and change out the lemon juice for balsamic vinegar or apple cider vinegar. And this salad can take you all the way into fall. Next. For our summer recipe highlight, I wanted to talk about this corn, tomato, and cucumber salad. This salad is just a burst of summer in a bite. I love it so much. And if you have some super fresh corn from your CSA or a farmer's market, you can absolutely eat it raw. It's delicious. You just slice the kernels off a few ears of corn, mix them with some cut up cucumbers and heirloom tomatoes, also in season in our region in the summer. All that needs is a little bit of good tasting olive oil, some red wine vinegar, maybe a squeeze of lemon, salt and pepper. I promise you, if your ingredients are fresh, this salad is truly transcendent. And it makes a really great side dish with, say, a piece of fish, if it's just too hot in your house to cook for a long time. Or if perhaps you stayed at the park a little too long with your kids and now it's late and you need to get dinner on the table, this salad is there for you. Next. Coming now into fall, still lots of delicious things to be had. Apples, pears, lima beans, beets, broccoli, cauliflower, carrots, collards, kale, leeks, parsnips, pumpkins and winter squash, turnips and sweet potatoes are still harvested through the fall in our region. Next. I wanted to spotlight winter squash. It's way more than just pumpkin and pumpkin spice everything. You'll see butternut squash, acorn squash, delicata, kabocha as common varieties in our region. Winter squash is high in fiber, potassium, magnesium, and vitamins A and C, which are good for the immune system. And I know we're thinking about that a lot recently too. I think one of the big challenges with winter squash is it's just so unwieldy, it's hard, it's difficult to cut. And so a good tip is to just pierce it with a knife or a fork and then microwave it for 3 to 5 minutes to soften it up before you try peeling or cutting it. Now it's a lot easier to handle. For some of the squash, the skin is quite thin. So for example, with the delicata squash, you can just go ahead and eat the skin. For any of these squash, you can just go ahead and roast them with a variety of spices, add them to soups and stews, or again, mash or puree them, just like your root veggies. Next. To kind of wrap up this talk and the fictional harvest year that we've just gone through together, I wanted to really accentuate the ways in which we can use seasonal produce as inspiration for a variety of delicious, heart-healthy meals. So going from left to right, first you see here a Japanese sweet potato curry. And when you look at recipes for Japanese curry, they often contain sweet potatoes and yams. And a lot of them also have grated apple, which is a really healthy way to add sweetness. And again, something that's in season at the same time. Makes a really beautiful, balanced, heart-healthy meal with some baked tofu and a side of greens. In the middle is borscht. Borscht is a beet-based soup, typically seen in Russian and Eastern European cuisines. You can throw the kitchen sink in this soup. You can give it lima beans, carrots, any root vegetables you have on hand. And in the end, it's typically finished with a little bit of white vinegar. And this gives it a really distinctive and pungent flavor. And then finally, you have a Moroccan butternut squash and chickpea stew. You'll often see butternut squash and other of those winter squash used with Moroccan flavors, and they lend themselves really well. And what I love about recipes with Moroccan flavors is often you'll see savory spices mixed with sweet spices. So you'll have some garlic and some cumin together with some cinnamon and ginger. And so it's just a really great way to mix up the flavors. As you see here, we have 3 perfectly heart-healthy and completely plant-based meals that give you a variety of different flavor options. So often people come to me and they're really concerned about embarking on a journey towards a heart-healthy diet because they tell me they love food, right? That's their concern, is they love food. And I think that a heart-healthy diet does not have to be restrictive and it does not have to be dull. I really hope that I've proven to you this evening that there is plenty to love about heart-healthy foods throughout the entire season. Thank you very much for your time and your attention this evening. Anya, you can advance to the end. Thank you kindly.
Melissa, thank you so much. That was terrific. I'm hungry, number one. I don't know, it looks delicious. So obviously we are going to get a lot of people saying, how do we get Melissa's recipes? And, you know, and a lot of people have actually asked me, how do I get the slides? We are going to put this on YouTube. So you will be able to get this information. And then you can actually see Melissa. And I know this is, I just want to point this out, but Melissa's available in consultation. The number's on that last slide, 212-263-0855. And maybe you'll do a cooking class, because now I'm highly motivated, really amazing. We've got a few questions. There are about 10 questions, so maybe you can just keep them short and try to get to the question and answer. The first question is there any harm nutritionally when you eat fruits that are shipped here but are not seasonally correct? In other words, have they been sitting in a box and frozen, et cetera, et cetera? Yeah,
short answer is no. I don't think there's any harm. Slightly expanded on answer. I think that when, the most important thing is to eat a variety of fruits and vegetables for our health. And then if you can choose these sort of local seasonal foods, I think it's just going to take you from an A to an A+. But if for some reason you can't access them or it's not financially feasible for you, I think you should eat what you can get.
Okay. Next one. Which nuts are best? And the question is pumpkin, walnuts, almonds, all of them, all of the above.
Yeah, I think the answer is all of the above. I always say whichever nuts you like are the right ones for you. And it kind of goes back to what I touched on before about variety being good nutrition, because each nut is going to give you a slightly different profile of vitamins and minerals. They're also going to give you a slightly different profile of fatty acids. All of them are going to be predominantly unsaturated fats. And so I think by embarking on a variety, first of all, it keeps your diet more interesting, right? But then also variety is just good nutrition.
So a question on this, some people are concerned about eating too many almonds because of the calories. Do you tell people 5 a day if they've got a weight issue, or that's really always a good question, because the almonds are delicious. It's easy to eat 20, 30 almonds in a go. Do you think you need to limit them if you're worrying about your weight?
Yeah, I think it's really person specific, because ultimately fats do have more calories per bite than proteins and carbohydrates. And so if you are a person that's thinking about changing your weight, then it likely behooves you to think about the portion size of your nuts.
Okay. Here's someone with carotid artery blockages. So we call that carotid stenosis, or you've got plaque in the carotids, which are the arteries that go up to your neck. Should even healthy fats, i.e. nuts, avocado, or olive oil be avoided? And this gets to the question of healthy fats.
Right. Yeah, I think not. Because when we look at the research we have supporting the Mediterranean diet, for example, which is the one that is really liberal in these healthy fats, our most recent large-scale randomized controlled trial, the PREDIMED trial, actually showed the greatest benefit in stroke prevention. And when we're thinking about carotid blockage specifically, right, we're thinking about potential stroke. So that tells me that I don't think that you need to limit these healthy fats if all of these people in that trial were actually suffering decreased rates of stroke. So I think that it is still reasonable.
And to your point, the studies always show that when you eat legumes and nuts and these healthy fats, that's the group of patients that do well. So it's really important. I've got a question about, people should it be Mediterranean diet, plant-based diet? There's things that are kind of hectic to watch, like Forks Over Knives, and Dr. Esselstyn's makes a huge point for a plant-based diet. Do you think the Mediterranean diet's got so much good data? But if somebody said, hey, I want to be on the best possible diet, I'm prepared to go plant-based, would you say go for it? Or would you say, I think you can be perfectly happy on a Mediterranean diet? Because there are people who want to have a piece of meat or fish. And I'm a big believer that Mediterranean is the way to go, because most people can't do a full-on plant-based diet. But what do you think?
I think it really is so person specific. I believe strongly in tailoring the approach to each person because we have to think about, first of all, your medical history, right? And what are your personal health goals? Then also, what are your food preferences and what calls most to you?
Right.
So, when we think about the Mediterranean diet, it kind of is in essence a mostly plant-based diet. We're still pushing more plant foods and more plant protein than the standard American diet. So if you're someone who wants to kind of go all out and you want to try a plant-based diet and it's sustainable for you, then I would just want to help you do that in a balanced way and in a way that's health promoting. But do I think that you can still likely achieve great health benefits from these sort of more moderate approaches, like the Mediterranean diet or that flexitarian diet? Absolutely.
And if someone says, "Can I eat meat?" I want to eat it. I am a heart patient. Do you have advice? Do you say you should go organic? Do you say once a week? Do you have any advice for someone who really does like the meat and doesn't want to cut it out?
Yeah, sometimes is kind of the advice. And again, it's really person specific because, let's say you're someone who's really a meat and potatoes person and most of your diet is red meat and potatoes, then I would say, let's get down to twice a week or 3 times a week. That'll net you benefit. If you're someone who's already sort of eating a more balanced diet, then I might say something like once a week, or for some patients, we'll even go once a month because they really want to push to, for instance, lower their LDL cholesterol or something like that.
Perfect. Next slide, Anya. So this is really a good question related to in the times we're in. How does the pandemic affect the food supply distribution and availability?
I think this is kind of really topical for what we were discussing tonight because the pandemic really highlighted the importance of having a thriving local food supply. Because what happened is, we currently kind of get most of our food from a few food companies. So they're processing everything at just a few plants throughout the nation. And so what happens if we cannot really fully staff those plants while keeping the workers safe, or if the plants have to shut down entirely, right? As sometimes happened if there was an outbreak. And then we're kind of all stuck. So it really underscores the benefit of supporting local agriculture. And that means eating seasonally.
Great. I've got 3 questions here from Sunny Kanofsky. I'm calling out your name because thank you for your questions. And you also wrote a very nice comment about the lectures, and I really appreciate it. He's asking 2 specific questions. I'll tackle them and you can weigh in as well. So one question is, do the commercially available beet chews lower blood pressure? So I know that's kind of, it is off the beaten, excuse the pun, track a little bit. But I'll just say one thing about this, because people ask me about this. I'm very holistic and integrative. People ask me a lot about supplements and what should we do? And my bottom line always is try to get your supplements, get your new minerals and vitamins from healthy foods. That's first prize always. But a lot of people aren't eating healthy foods, and therefore I do believe that you need to supplement at times, and magnesium is a big favorite of mine. Let me just tell you about beets. Beets have been shown to contain nitrates. Nitrates get converted to nitric acid in the body, and there is a blood pressure lowering effect. It's not major. The one study I saw was from 2012 in the Journal of Clinical Nutrition. There was a Dr. Cole from Melbourne, Australia, and it was a small study with 30 patients, and she did show that when you take a glass of this beetroot juice every day, and it lowered the blood pressure an average of about 4 points. So there's no big studies on this. I don't think it can hurt you. There is a blood pressure lowering effect. It would be very, very mild. I wouldn't see this as a treatment for high blood pressure specifically, but it certainly isn't going to hurt. And you'll see a lot of supplement companies are making the powder, the beet powder, and they tell you to take a teaspoon, 5 grams a day. So I am going to throw it back at you. My thing is, if you want to eat, you want to take beet powder and juice, no problem, but don't rely on it to treat hypertension.
Yeah, agree. I can't say that I'm very familiar with the beet chews specifically, but in general, for any supplements, agree with Dr. Goodman 100% that it can't take the place of working towards an overall healthy diet. And that's partly because of what we talked about up top with the importance of the overall dietary pattern. Ultimately, I think we're just beginning to scratch the surface of what food does in our bodies. And so if we try to kind of cherry pick benefits of certain foods or certain nutrients, and we don't eat them together, and we don't eat them in their kind of whole state, I just don't know that we get the same benefit.
Okay. Another question from Sunny. How can we safely add in 30 grams of MCT, caprylic and capric acid twice a day to help with brain health for those with Alzheimer's and preclinical Alzheimer's? You can see Sunny is, interested in these supplements and things that may be helpful. So for the audience, just let me say what we mean by that, by MCT, are these mixed chain fatty acids. So it's monounsaturated, medium chain fatty acids. Specifically, these ones come from coconut. And I just wanted to get your point about what you think about coconut oil. It's being controversial because people say that it also contains saturated fat that can raise your cholesterol. But for this specific question, can these medium chain fatty acids help with Alzheimer's or preclinical Alzheimer's? I've seen some reports that it can help with judgment, it can help with memory. There's no big studies on this, and really it's not out there in prime time of something that we recommend. But clearly, healthy fats help the brain because we metabolize fats. The brain requires healthy fats to function properly. It turns out that glucose is an important source of energy for the brain. And apparently, when you get Alzheimer's and dementia, it's not metabolizing glucose properly. And some of these medium chain fatty acids get converted to ketones, which is another source of energy for the brain. So, you must get these questions all the time. And I'm a believer we need to research and give people answers, not say, well, I don't, because you don't know doesn't mean it doesn't help. So I'm just giving I just told you what I know about it. And I would say we don't have good data to say that this is going to protect your brain, but I'm a big believer in healthy fats. And I do think that coconut oil can be helpful. And I'm not one of these people who says completely stay away from it. You do have to be careful if you've got high cholesterol. How do you feel?
Yeah, I think I agree with supplements. Sometimes what I end up saying is, let me go check the research. And then there's just not a ton, right? There's not a lot of, oftentimes there's not slam dunk evidence. So I usually just want to make sure that it's not going to cause harm. And this gets at the question of, is coconut oil going to cause harm? And if we're thinking about heart health, I think the jury is still out. The American Heart Association is still telling us to use tropical oils like coconut and palm in moderation, but I'm really looking forward to seeing more research about whether these can be incorporated safely and whether the saturated fats from these foods really do impact our body differently than saturated fats from animal foods.
Exactly. I think we do know saturated fats from animal foods are not good. And that is one of the reasons that they're a problem. And you want to try to stay away from the saturated fats as much as possible. And so the unsaturated fats are the ones we find in the healthy fats, like olive oil and avocado and things like that. And my last question is from Nancy. Does our body absorb calcium from dairy products? And that's a good question. We need calcium, especially women. What do you tell women about having dairy products to get their calcium, or do you think they should supplement on top of that, basically for treatment and particularly prevention of osteoporosis?
Yeah, I think that it's great to get calcium from a variety of sources. I know dairy is so controversial for many reasons, and I wouldn't say that our body isn't absorbing calcium from dairy, but I think that it is reasonable to think about all of the foods that we can incorporate to increase our calcium intake. It's also in dark leafy greens and soy products and sesame seeds. And so I would encourage a variety of these high calcium foods in general. And then if you're not quite getting there, then certainly you can add a supplement.
I agree with that. And just so people should know, we're talking about supplement. Vitamin D is very important. The major action of vitamin D is to increase calcium absorption from the gut. So if you're vitamin D deficient, you can actually have less calcium in your body. So very important to get your vitamin D levels checked, make sure that they're in good range. You should get a 125 hydroxy vitamin D level. That is something easily checked with a blood test, and you should supplement if you're very, very low. If you're below 30, I believe you should supplement or make sure that you're getting enough sunlight, which is something you can talk about to your doctor. How much do you need? So I thought this was one of our best lectures ever. Okay, I'm giving you like a 10 out of 10 because you gave so much good information. You're so passionate about your subject. You clearly love food, but you love healthy food. And we all like hungry now for going to make some vegetables. And so
welcome to the world of a nutritionist. I talk about food all day and I'm hungry all day.
But you know what? I can see you can talk about food all day. and you're very passionate about healthy food. And I really appreciate you coming on. And I want to thank you for talking to our group. And we all know how to get hold of you. Is there a way that someone can actually send you an email? I know not everybody wants to call the office and make an appointment, but would you take a question from one of our audience if they emailed you?
Sure, no problem. It's my first name dot my last name at NYULangone.org.
Or to make it easier, they could go through Anya and just go through the email that we gave them at the beginning of the slide, and Anya can definitely forward it on to you and get the answer back to them. Thank you very much. Once again, Anya, Michelle, Melissa, thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you all on Zoom on April 28th. Thank you.
Hey, this is Ben at Hardy Roots Farm, Claremont, New York. We're about 100 miles north of the city, right on the east bank of the Hudson River. And we farm mostly vegetables. That's our main thing. We're certified organic vegetables. Also have a flock of laying hens for eggs. Take care of some pigs. We'll be taking care of some sheep this year. And we do most of our growing for our community supported agriculture program, our CSA. So we subscribe about probably close to 1,000 families every year. And some of those families are in the Hudson River Valley around our farm. And some of them are in New York City in several different neighborhoods at community locations around the city. And members who subscribe to our CSA program sign up in the spring to be shareholders and pay upfront for some of their cost of their vegetables in the spring. And we take that money, upfront payment, and use it to buy our seeds, heat our greenhouse, pay our crew, and grow vegetables that we then deliver throughout the growing season to the families involved, the families who are members. And that has been the way we've been running our farm since we got it started 18 years ago. I'm a first generation farmer, so I didn't grow up farming. Worked for some other CSA farmers in different parts of the country before starting our farm. And the CSA program is what really enabled us to get started, gave us the money every year we needed to buy some equipment, to get things going, to not have to take out loans that were sapping away some of our money with interest, and also that just shared the risk in the whole season with the community that we're growing for, so that we weren't shouldering all the risk of farming, which can be a risky endeavor when it comes to weather and natural disasters, things like that. So the CSA has really enabled us to do what we're doing well. It also, those benefits in terms of not having to pay interest and things like that transfer over to the CSA members, because that means that we're able to give you a really great price on your vegetables rather than having to pay some of that money back to the bank. So ends up being a pretty good deal for everyone involved. And because we're doing this CSA thing, we're trying to grow a lot of everything. Really diverse group of crops that we're growing on the farm. We're not just picking, the handful of things that are the most profitable for us. We're trying to grow a really wide variety to satisfy our members in terms of what they want to be eating on their dinner table every week. And so that makes for a super diverse group of plant families that we're planting here at the farm. And that's a really good thing in terms of taking care of our soil and our kind of ecosystem right around the farm. Instead of growing just one giant field of potatoes, which would invite certain pests that would have to be controlled with sprays and which would deplete the soil of certain nutrients, we're always rotating what we grow. It changes every year. So a certain field will have one plant family this year and a different one the next year. And within 4 years, we never want to repeat that plant family in the same spot. We're also spend a lot of time taking care of our soil in other ways, growing cover crops. That's a crop that we grow specifically just to improve the soil, not to harvest for food. That would be something like a legume, like a clover, or a certain type of grass like rye or oats. And we're just growing that to take carbon out of the atmosphere and put it back into the soil. Also fix nitrogen from the atmosphere into the soil as basically free fertilizer instead of trucking around fertilizer. And so that's part of our rotation in terms of making sure that we're taking care of our soil and taking care of our local ecosystem. Another thing about our soil I'd say is, technically these days you can have a certified organic hydroponic operation. You could have a completely indoor farm with no soil at all, as long as you were pumping certifiable organic nutrients through the plastic tubes. You'd be getting technically organic produce out of a hydroponic operation. A lot of organic farmers aren't too on board with that, but I think it's really important to have soil involved in the process, just from some kind of philosophical standpoints, but also I think in terms of the quality of food and nutrient value of the food. You're working with these plants, and the goal with organic farming, of course, is rather than just feeding the plant through nutrients that you're putting in through fertilizer, is that you're really feeding the soil and setting up the plant to have this really ideal situation where the plant can take really good care of itself with as few interventions as possible. So having a really nutrient-rich soil where the plant can access all those nutrients on its own, not just the big major nutrients of like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium that you could pump in through fertilizer, but all those micronutrients, those minerals that are super important for both the plant's health and for human health. And so I think the nutrient density of our produce, really benefits from actually being in the soil, not some like hydroponic system or something like that. And that extends the benefits of the health, both in terms of the plant being healthier, producing better, taking better care of the people who are eating it, giving them better nutrients. And also in terms of carbon footprint, in terms of the plant being able to get that food from the soil, instead of having to truck in fertilizer or something like that, even if it's organic fertilizer. This is kind of a tangent, but like in terms of some of these hydroponic indoor operations, they say, oh, we're using less land and we're using less water or something like that. And it's just bogus. It's the water that we use is rainwater. It's not like we're trucking it in from a California aquifer or something like that. It's rainwater that falls from the sky. The land that we're using, our whole goal with organic farming is that it's not a bad thing that we're using this land. We're taking good care of it. We're trying to provide ecosystem services by using the land well, by planting these cover crops that take carbon from the atmosphere and put it into the soil, and by not planting in such a way that we don't have erosion, so we're preserving topsoil or even growing it, and providing cleaner water by filtering the water into the underground aquifers by taking good care of our land. So those are some of the benefits that we're trying to enact from the kind of farming we're doing, and some of the reasons that we love doing the CSA farming the way that we do it in cooperation with our community, in a way that we think benefits us as the farmers, our community as the eaters, and our local economy and ecosystem. And I guess I'd just say one other thing that I really like about kind of the way we farm is it's not as efficient, right, to grow 60 different kinds of crops when we could just be growing potatoes with a few machines. We have a crew of, in the summer, we're up to like 14 people. So yeah, it's less efficient than if we were growing all potatoes. But I think it's, if we're going to sacrifice efficiency in the name of having like good jobs for people who are enjoying the work we're doing, the more kind of effort and energy we can put into taking care of our land, that's a good thing. More people on the land means it's being taken care of more carefully, and providing greater benefits to the community. The jobs that we do here on the farm are enjoyable jobs. I mean, they're hard work for sure, but they're fulfilling, they're enjoyable. We're able to pay the crew well, and everyone's working together on all the different tasks, and it's fulfilling work that's benefiting our community. So I'll choose that over sinking a couple $100,000 into a giant potato harvester any day. glad I could share with you a little bit about what we do at Hardy Roots Farm and why we do it the way we do. And thanks so much for inviting me to speak to you. Take care.